Goodwill used to be a symbol of a second chance. But today, more and more Americans are walking out of these stores with the same question. What happened to Goodwill? A used plastic water bottle is priced at $7. A used pair of Levi's jeans costs $40. A guitar that was donated for free ends up on the shelf with a price tag of $500. And that's only what people see out on the sales floor. The real story begins behind the doors of the donation intake area, and the farther we follow the journey of those donated items, the more we realize this was never just a story about Goodwill. It reflects a much bigger change happening across America itself. Every day, in thousands of towns across America, a quiet ritual still takes place. Someone cleans out a garage after years of putting it off. Someone folds up the clothes their kids have outgrown. Someone wipes the dust off a guitar that hasn't been played in years. Then they bring it all to the same place. Goodwill. Most of them believe in one very simple idea, that those items won't end up in a landfill. They'll get a second life. A winter coat will help someone make it through the cold season. A microwave will find its way into a college student's first apartment. An old guitar will end up in the hands of a child who's always dreamed of learning music, but whose family can't afford to buy a new one. That used to be what Goodwill stood for. There was a time when walking into Goodwill meant opportunity. A t-shirt cost only $1 or $2. A pair of jeans was just a few dollars. A winter coat was still affordable for a family trying to stretch every dollar. Someone who had just lost a job could still find a suit to walk into a job interview with confidence. A teacher could still buy enough supplies for the classroom without having to think twice about every item. Goodwill wasn't just a thrift store. It was a quiet safety net that so many Americans once relied on. But if you walk into a Goodwill store today, that feeling can disappear within minutes. A shopper picks up a used plastic water bottle. He flips over the price tag. $7. He laughs because he thinks someone must have made a mistake. Then he looks over at a decorative item from Dollar Tree that still sold brand new for $1.25. Goodwill has it priced at $4. Next comes a used Harley-Davidson shirt. $30. A used pair of Levi's jeans. $40. And behind the glass display, an old guitar is priced at $500. Numbers like these leave many people wondering if they're standing in a thrift store or a retail store. The part that confuses people the most isn't the price. It's that Goodwill never bought these items from a factory. They weren't imported. They weren't manufactured. They were brought in by the community, completely free, with the hope that they would help someone else. So why do items given out of kindness end up on the shelves with price tags that even the donors find shocking? The answer isn't on the price tags. It's behind the doors of the donation intake area. And that's exactly where the real story begins. If you've ever donated something to Goodwill, you've probably imagined a pretty simple journey. You set down a shirt, a coffee maker, or a guitar at the donation drop-off area. An employee carries it inside. A few hours later, or at most a few days later, it shows up on a shelf in that same store, waiting for someone else to take it home. That's what most of us think. But that's only the beginning of the story. Right behind the donation area is a place that very few shoppers ever get to see. This is where every item goes through a sorting process. Clothing is inspected. Electronics are evaluated for their condition. Household items are checked to see if they're complete. But for some items, the process doesn't stop there. Imagine that 2 shirts are donated at the same time. The first is an ordinary t-shirt. The second is a vintage pair of Levi's or a vintage shirt that's highly sought after by collectors. They won't necessarily follow the same path. According to training materials and accounts shared by employees, Goodwill provides guidance on how to identify categories of products that have high value in the resale market, from vintage Levi's jeans and Nike shoes to single-stitch t-shirts. Shirts that collectors often seek out because they're associated with earlier decades. That's when the item's journey begins to take a different direction. Instead of being placed on the sales floor of the local store, many higher-value items are packed up and shipped to another location. That destination is shopgoodwill.com. This is the online auction platform operated by the Goodwill network, where locations across America can list donated items that are considered valuable and sell them to the highest bidder. According to Goodwill, the platform has generated more than $1 billion in cumulative sales. For many people, the existence of Shop Goodwill isn't the surprising part. What surprises them is realizing that the journey of a donated item can be completely different from what they always imagined. And if valuable donations are now taking a different path, then the next question is, what caused the entire Goodwill system to change the way it operates? Goodwill didn't change overnight, because America had already changed first. Around 2020, a very different scene began appearing in Goodwill stores across the country. It wasn't more donation drop-offs. It wasn't more families struggling financially. It was more and more people walking into the store with a phone in their hand. They weren't just looking at a shirt. They were checking its price on eBay. They weren't just picking up a pair of shoes. They were looking up what it was selling for. In just a few seconds of a TikTok video, a shirt bought for $3 could be flipped for $50 or $60. Millions of people watched videos like that every day. And before long, millions of others started thinking, maybe I should try this too. Shopping at thrift stores was no longer associated with families trying to save money or people going through financial hardship. It became a trend. Thrift haul and thrift flip videos started flooding social media. Vintage Levi's jeans, vintage Harley-Davidson shirts, and Y2K clothing suddenly became some of the most sought-after items across America. What had once been a hobby for a small group quickly grew into a massive market. According to industry reports, the U.S. resale apparel market alone reached about $53 billion in 2023 and is projected to grow to around $59 billion by 2025. The sector has been growing significantly faster than traditional retail. Used items were no longer just used items. For many people, they had become assets that could be bought, sold, and turned into profit. And that change quickly showed up inside Goodwill stores themselves. At Goodwill bins, where clothing is sold by the pound, the atmosphere wasn't the same anymore. Whenever a new bin rolled out, dozens of people almost instantly moved toward it. Gloves, shopping carts, phones, the sound of clothes being pulled apart, the constant beeping of barcode scanners. Some people checked prices on eBay. Others opened Depop. Some needed only a few seconds to decide whether an item was worth buying. Every shirt, every pair of shoes, every handbag was being looked at through the same question. How much could I resell this for? But that's only half the story. On the other end of the system, the donations Goodwill receives have been changing too. While more and more people are hunting for vintage Levi's and vintage shirts, millions of low-cost clothing items from fast fashion brands continue pouring into donation centers. Clothing is being made faster, bought more often, and replaced more quickly. The lifespan of every item keeps getting shorter. That means Goodwill stores have to process more clothing than ever before, even though most of it has very little value. On one side are vintage items that get snapped up the moment they appear. On the other are growing piles of fast fashion clothing. Two completely different streams meet in the same place. Goodwill. That's when the system found itself facing a completely new challenge. How do you run a network that receives millions of donated items every year when the value of those items keeps getting farther apart? Goodwill can't change the market, but it can change how it responds to the market. And that decision changed the way Goodwill has operated ever since. By this point, we know one thing. Goodwill no longer operates like the thrift store that so many Americans remember. But one big question still remains. If most of the merchandise is donated for free, why do the prices surprise so many people? The answer begins with the journey of a single shirt. A shirt on a Walmart shelf usually has to pass through a factory, a shipping container, an ocean, distribution centers, and only then reach the store. At every step along the way, the cost goes up. But the shirt on a Goodwill rack may have been hanging in a family's closet just yesterday. This morning, they brought it to a donation center. And at that very moment, a new item entered the system. Not from a factory, but from the community itself. That's the biggest difference. While most retailers have to pay to acquire their merchandise, most of Goodwill's inventory is donated free of charge. That doesn't mean selling those items is free. Goodwill still has to pay for employees, rent, utilities, transportation, technology, and sorting. But not having to purchase the merchandise in the first place creates a completely different business model. Its supply is different too. Every day, thousands of families across America continue bringing clothing, electronics, and household goods to donation centers. That creates a constant stream of new inventory flowing into the system. And that's where pricing begins to change. If you walk into many Goodwill stores today, you'll easily notice specially curated sections. A vintage Harley-Davidson shirt, a pair of vintage Levi's jeans, a single-stitch t-shirt. Items that were once mixed in with thousands of other donations are now separated out and given completely different price tags. Some items are even sent to Goodwill's online auction platform, Shop Goodwill, instead of being placed on the shelves of a local store. This is where the way many people see Goodwill also began to change. For decades, Goodwill was seen as a place where the community could find affordable items. Today, many people believe the organization is becoming more and more involved in America's rapidly growing resale market. And the debate has gradually changed as well. It no longer revolves around just one question. How much is this shirt worth? Instead, it has become a much bigger question. How much should a nonprofit operate like a business? From that point on, Americans' attention no longer stopped at the price tags. They started reading financial reports, looking through public records, researching how much the people running the system are paid. And that's exactly when the debate entered a completely different phase. By this point, the debate over Goodwill is no longer just about the price tags on the shelves. It has grown into a much bigger question. How is the money being used? To find the answer, many people turned to a source of information that any American can access. Form 99. Oh, the public financial filing that nonprofit organizations in the United States are required to submit every year. It was through these documents that the public began seeing numbers that very few people had paid attention to before. Across many Goodwill organizations around the country, publicly disclosed compensation for top executives ranges from around $500,000 to $700,000, and in some cases exceeds $1 million a year. Those figures quickly became the subject of debate. Not because America has never seen CEOs with high salaries. In the private sector, that's nothing unusual. What caught people's attention was that Goodwill has always been known as a non-profit organization with a mission to serve the community. Because of that, its financial reports are often viewed by a different standard than those of a typical retail business. But that still wasn't the most controversial part. For many years, some Goodwill organizations operated under Section 14(c) of the Fair Labor Standards Act, or FLSA. This provision allows, under very specific conditions, certain organizations to pay wages below the federal minimum wage to some workers with disabilities, based on evaluations of their productivity. When this law was created decades ago, its purpose was to create more employment opportunities for people who had largely been left out of the job market. In other words, the original goal was not to reduce workers' rights, but to encourage organizations to hire people who might otherwise have had an extremely difficult time finding work. However, according to numerous investigations by American news organizations in the years that followed, the system became the subject of significant controversy. Some reports found that at certain facilities, workers with disabilities were paid just 22 cents, 38 cents, or 41 cents per hour under this legal provision. Those numbers quickly became the focus of debate across America. It's important to note that Section 14(c) was not used only by Goodwill. Many other organizations and businesses also operated under the same provision. However, because Goodwill is one of America's best-known charitable organizations, much of the public attention focused on it. In recent years, under pressure from public opinion and changes in labor policy, many Goodwill organizations have ended their participation in the 14(c) program, and many states have also restricted or eliminated the use of this provision. But the debate didn't end. Put these two numbers side by side. On one side, executive compensation exceeding $1 million a year at some organizations. On the other, wages of only a few cents an hour that some workers with disabilities once received under a controversial legal provision. Those two numbers were never part of the same payroll, but when they appeared together in news reports and investigations, they changed the way many people viewed Goodwill. Supporters argue that a system with thousands of stores, tens of thousands of employees, and extensive job training programs needs capable leadership, along with enough financial resources to keep operating. Critics, meanwhile, ask a different question. When an organization is built on items voluntarily donated by the community, where is the line between operating efficiently and losing sight of its original mission? It's a question that, even today, still has no answer that everyone agrees on. And as that debate spread, the response from American consumers began to change in ways that perhaps even Goodwill never expected. If these debates once existed only in financial reports or investigative news stories, over the past few years, they have become part of everyday life in America. Just open TikTok, YouTube, or Reddit and search for #Goodwill pricing, and you'll find thousands of videos asking the same question. Why is this item so expensive? A used water bottle costs almost as much as a brand new one. A faded shirt, or items that still have their original Dollar Tree price tags, yet Goodwill has priced them even higher than the brand new retail price. What's notable isn't that a few items have controversial price tags. It's that thousands of people in different states are all telling remarkably similar stories. That's also when a new term began appearing in discussions about the thrift industry. Thrift gentrification. Simply put, it's the feeling that stores originally created for low-income shoppers are gradually becoming places better suited for brand hunters and resellers. But while the debate continues to grow, Americans haven't stopped helping one another. They've simply changed how they help. In Seattle, the Buy Nothing Project began with one very simple idea. If you have something you no longer use, don't sell it. Don't throw it away. Give it directly to a neighbor who needs it. That idea quickly spread to thousands of communities across America. No sorting warehouse, no pricing, no auction. The person giving the item knows exactly who received it. That's what has made many people feel like they've rediscovered the original meaning of donating. And it's not just the Buy Nothing Project. more and more families are choosing to donate to local church thrift stores or small community organizations. Not necessarily because they oppose Goodwill, but because they want to know the item they're giving away will reach the person who truly needs it. At the same time, it wouldn't be fair to look at Goodwill only through the lens of controversy. Every year, the organization continues to fund job training programs, employment assistance, and many services for people facing hardship. That's why Goodwill continues to have the support of so many people. In their view, a system with thousands of stores can't operate without enough revenue. But between those two viewpoints, there's one group of people that barely appears in the debate. Not vintage hunters, not eBay resellers. It's the single mother who has just moved into her first apartment after a divorce. It's the man who just lost his job and needs clothes for a job interview. It's the college student trying to furnish a first kitchen with only a few dozen dollars. 20 years ago, Goodwill was where many of them started over. If one day those people can no longer afford to shop at the very place that was created to serve them, then maybe the biggest question is no longer whether Goodwill is changing, but rather, has the original meaning of Goodwill remained the same as it was when it was founded? By now, we've probably realized one thing. The debate over Goodwill has never really been about used clothes, old guitars, or controversial price tags. It reflects something much bigger. It's about the way Americans are rethinking the meaning of generosity in a society that has changed so much. Decades ago, thrift stores in America stood for one very simple idea: second chance. A second chance. It was where someone who had just moved to a new city could find a first microwave for very little money. It was where a father who had just lost his job could still afford a suit that looked respectable enough for a job interview. It was where a family stretching every dollar could still buy winter coats for their children before the cold weather arrived. Not everyone who walked into Goodwill was struggling, but many people walked through those doors because they needed one more chance to start over. That's what gave thrift stores their special meaning. Today, the shelves are still there. The donation centers are still operating every day, and millions of donated items continue to be brought in by people across the country. What's changing isn't people's generosity. That generosity is still there. What's changing is how many people want their generosity to be passed on. Over the past few years, more and more people have chosen to donate to church thrift stores, community centers, or join groups like the Buy Nothing Project. Some simply choose to give directly to a family in their neighborhood, not necessarily because those places are always cheaper, and not because they're always better, but because they want to know exactly who their donation is going to. That shows today's debate isn't just about prices, it's about trust. The belief that an item given freely will continue to serve the purpose it was originally meant to serve. On the other hand, many people continue to support Goodwill. They point out that every year, the organization still provides job training, employment assistance, and community programs for millions of Americans. In their view, an organization of that size can't operate without stable funding and professional management. Meanwhile, critics argue that the more an organization is built on the trust of the community, the more carefully it should approach its pricing, operations, and the way it uses its resources. Maybe both viewpoints reflect very real concerns. One side is concerned about the long-term sustainability of the entire system. The other is concerned about the original purpose that led to the system being created. And maybe that's why the story of Goodwill is still being talked about after all these years. Not because of a used shirt, not because of an online auction, and not just because of a financial report, but because Goodwill has unintentionally raised a much bigger question. As an organization built on the generosity of the community continues to grow, how can it operate efficiently while still preserving the trust that made it possible in the first place. To this day, America still doesn't have an answer that everyone agrees on. And it's because that question remains unanswered that the debate over Goodwill continues. Maybe after today, Goodwill will still open its doors like it always does. Cars will still pull up to the donation area, bags of used clothes will still be dropped off, and millions of donated items will continue to begin a new journey. But maybe the thing that changes won't be inside that store. It will be the way we look at it. Because after all the debates over prices, online auctions, and the numbers in financial reports, the most valuable thing about Goodwill has never been the items on its shelves. It's the trust of the people who gave them away, hoping someone else would have a chance to start over. A used shirt can be given a price tag, but a second chance can't. And maybe what America is really trying to preserve has never been just a thrift store. It's the belief that, no matter what difficult chapter of life someone is going through, there will always be a door open for those who need a chance to start over.